Hi guys, this is chapter 11 of Ugly Friends and Enemies. The operations the doctors had done on my face over the years started to pay off. I made new friends at school and at home. Some kids were quick to see how different I was, but many others seemed not to notice, or at least not to care. I wasn't the most popular kid in school. I didn't have people rushing to spend every possible second with me at lunch, but I wasn't totally shunned and ignored either. Chief among my new school friends were Robert Furham and Robert Webb. For a while, we became the three Roberts, referred to as Robert H., Robert F., and Robert W. I had an easy connection with Robert F. Before a growth spurt, he had been of average height and a bit awkward. We both loved books and stories about stars and distant planets and spaceships. At Guardian Angels, we'd started hanging out, talking about space and astronomy. Robert W. was fun to hang around with too. But I think the main reason I wanted to be friends with him was because his name was Robert. After all, it wouldn't have been the three Roberts if there were only two of us. There were friends at home as well. Mainly, West was still a young suburb when I was growing up, especially compared to nearby Wingham. There were a few kids my age living right near our house. They were all girls, but that didn't matter to me. There was Cassandra, who lived next door, and down the road were Belinda and Evelyn. Evelyn's family didn't have a lot of money, and sometimes Mom would send us down to her house with tins of food. Often it was beetroot, which suited me just fine, as I thought it was horrid and we'd always had so much of it. To me, Cassandra was the most important. The others would come and go, but Cassandra and I were constant. She was the only child of a couple living next door, so she was always happy to get out of the house and play. She was even happier to come and join in the loud chaos of a large family like ours. Cassandra and I would spend whole afternoons chasing each other around one backyard, then over the fence into the other. We'd bounce on her trampoline for a few hours on end. She would run up and down the footpath, and I'd go up and down the road on the skateboard, artificial legs off, propelled myself forward with my arms. We'd play with Lego. She'd always have more Legos than me. But that was okay because I had much higher proportions of space Legos. And if there was one thing you need to build spaceships, it was space Lego. We'd grab the old sitter radio her parents had given her, go outside at night, raise the aerial and point it at the stars. Right at the bottom of the AM dial, just when you almost couldn't turn it any farther, we'd pick up strange signals, rhythmic electric pulses that could only be one thing: UFOs. Cassandra would sometimes turn up at our backyard door and politely ask Mom or Dad if I was home and would like to play. For my part, I'd go down to the fence between our two houses and yell, "Cassandra!" as loud as I could, a human megaphone. Because Dad was a shift worker and would often start early the next day, we'd have dinner at 5:30 or 6 p.m. and listen to the news. From 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. was TV viewing time for Mom and Dad. Without fail, the television would be switched to some news or current affairs program. Much to my horror, this meant missing shows like The Goonies on the ABC, especially Doctor Who. I'd go over to Cassandra's house straight after 2 so I could watch Doctor Who. We'd listen, sometimes scared for our familiar but strange alien signals. When the show finished, head home so Cassandra could eat tea and I could have a shower and get ready for bed. She was my best friend for a long time, even when I became a typical boy and was afraid to admit it. Together, Sandra, Evelyn, Belinda, and I had plenty of adventures. A few years in a row, we'd sold grapefruit on the corner. They were picked from a tree in Cassandra's yard. We made signs and mowed a table onto the footpath. Given all our efforts, tree climbing, grapefruit picking, sign designs, and drawings, we priced the grapefruit at 50 cents each. I decided the best form of advertisement was to stand on the corner of our street and yell at the top of my voice, "Grapefruits for sale!" I think in the first year we sold a grand total of 1 grapefruit. Next grapefruit season, we were right back at it though, picking, making signs, and selling. Again, my chief guide duty was to stand on the corner and yell at the top of my voice, "Grapefruits, grapefruits for sale, get your grapefruits." First day, we had no luck, selling a total of 0 grapefruits. We went home dejected. Next morning, we assembled to give another go. It didn't look like we were going to make our fortunes in grapefruit sales at the year either. But someone walked up and asked how many grapefruits we had. Cassandra said we had about a dozen in various stages of ripeness. The customer asked if she could buy a lot for $10. Absolutely, we said. After conferring with each other for exactly 3 seconds, a whole $10. That was a fortune to us. The neighborhood handed over the money and we handed over the grapefruit, happy and richer than we had been in our little lives. Things changed when we told Cassandra's parents. We were excited and asked if they could take the $10 and split it 4 ways for us. Concerned that the neighbor had spent so much on our enterprise, they decided we should go and give half of it back. Suddenly, our fortune was only half a fortune. But give it back we did. I think they must have thought the poor lady had only bought all the grapefruits to shut me up. The three girls were a little younger, and they seemed to adjust to me pretty quickly. Young kids are naturally very accepting of new and different things. The kid with the squishy nose and strange legs isn't the surprise when you're 3 years old and you hear stories about talking bears sitting at the table eating porridge. It's only as kids get older that they start to know what's normal and what's not. We used to congregate on footpaths and backyards and at a nearby park to play on the swings and scamper along the local creek, building bridges and trying to catch the small fish in the little stream. The girls would do cartwheels and I'd practice handstands without my prosthetics on. One day, when I took my legs off, Evelyn pointed at them. "Oh, what happened to your feet?" "Nothing," I said. "Who chopped them off?" Evelyn asked. "No one," I said. "Did you chop them off?" Still with the questions. "No." "Did the doctor chop them off?" "No." "Were you born like that?" "Yes." And we kept on playing. Other questions weren't quite so easy to answer. Sometimes I'd get asked, "How did you lose your legs?" As if I left them on the bus and they were waiting for me to reclaim from lost property. Outright sympathy could be just as frustrating. Sometimes passerbys would tilt their head and deliver an undeserved smile. "Look at the kid limping along the footpath," the smile would say. "Isn't he wonderful, inspirational, amazing?" There are some things I just couldn't avoid when it came to my disability. The first was knowing I needed to work smart during my life because I wasn't going to be able to work hard physically. When I came home from school with the bad test results, Mom would look at me sternly and Dad would say what he always said. At various times, Dad had been a meat worker, can cutter, forklift driver, and mower man. He knew I had a different path. "Robert," Dad would say, "you're not going to be digging ditches for a living. You've got to try harder." The second was that I seemed to have more of a sense than most kids about my physical space surrounding me. If you had 2 artificial legs, sometimes you're short and sometimes you're tall. Sometimes you experience the world on all 4s, jumping from place to place. Other times, you have your legs on and operate the way world intended, except when you stumble and your legs start rubbing 15 minutes after you and you put them on. The third thing was that there weren't a lot of people like me I could look up to. Men are meant to be strong. We are supposed to be powerful. Dad and Michael and Gary were tall and broad-shouldered. Most of the men I saw on TV were physical and active too. There were no disabled role models for a young boy trying to work out what sort of man he could be. I'd have to ask more of those questions myself, try to work out an answer on my own. So guys, that was chapter 11. Look for the next one of chapter 12.